So they were like, hell no, you can't buy Twitter. We'd rather die. We'd like chew on cyanide before being bought. That was their initial response.
And then, you said, actually, I don't want to buy it.
And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, you know, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC? Times publish things that are false. Do you agree that that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Correct.
In its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes. What hate speech are you talking about? I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
But just a personal anecdote. Like, what do you? I don't.
Personally, my for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content. Yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that. I'm not saying anything. I'm saying.
Well, I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well,
okay, so then you must have at some point seen that for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying...
Then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet. And yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well...
That's false.
No, what I claimed...
You just lied.
What? No.
Look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know this hateful content?
Why did you agree to do this interview with the BBC?
I don't know. I like spontaneity, and I don't know. There's a lot going on, and it seems like I actually do have a lot of respect for the BBC. Although sometimes I forget what the BBC stands for, you know. But what is it? Just kidding.
You know what it stands for.
Yes, I do. Yeah. So there's a lot going on. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to answer some questions and. You know, I guess maybe get some feedback too. What should we be doing different? I know the BBC, for example, is not thrilled about being labelled state-affiliated media.
Not exactly. I mean, I was going to get to that later, but let's go for it now. It's officially objected to that term. Do you want to respond to it?
Yeah. So our goal is simply to have, to be as truthful and accurate as possible. So. I think we're adjusting the label to be publicly funded, which I think is perhaps not too objectionable. We're trying to be accurate.
I'm not the BBC, but publicly funded is how the BBC describes it.
Okay, so that would be accurate.
Itself.
If we use the same words that the BBC uses to describe itself, that presumably would be okay. I'm not asking you for a yes or no, since you're not running the BBC per se, but it seems to pass a reasonable
So you're going to change those labels on the BBC Twitter feed and also NPR's as well?
Yeah. Right. Publicly funded. Basically, that's we're trying to be as accurate as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fine. First of all, I just want to clear something up. Are you sleeping in the office? Here?
I sometimes sleep in the office.
Like?
In the library.
5 days a week?
No.
3 days a week?
I'm not here 5 days a week. But there's a library that nobody goes to on the 7th floor, and there's a couch there, and I sleep there sometimes.
Okay. In terms of the general overview, the reason why I think you've agreed to do this is because you wanted to talk about the first 6 months as chief executive owner of Twitter.
Yeah, it's kind of like whatever you want to talk about, you know?
Right. So How do you think it's gone?
Well, it's not been boring. It's been quite a roller coaster. I mean, things are going, I think, reasonably well. I mean, we've seen some all-time highs in terms of total user time. So we passed 8 billion user minutes per day, which is a lot of user minutes. So usage is up, growth is good, the site works mostly. We have a few glitches here and there, but the site is working fairly well. And we're doing it with a small fraction of the original, headcount. So,
I mean, you mentioned outages there. There have been several.
Yeah.
And we've actually spoken to an engineer who works at Twitter, and they said that the plumbing is broken here and it's on fire and there could be problems at any minute. Do you accept that?
I mean, there have been a few outages, but not for very long, and it's currently working fine.
So it doesn't keep you up at night that Twitter might go offline again?
At this point, I think we've got a pretty good handle on what makes Twitter work. And we're also doing it with 2 data centers instead of 3. So we used to have 3 data centers. We shut down one of them. So we were actually roughly two-thirds of the prior compute capability. But we've made so many improvements to the core algorithm. In some cases, we improved the core algorithm by 80%. So the actual CPU usage or computer usage is dramatically less. But the results speak for themselves. The system, despite being at all-time highs of usage, is fast. It's responsive. It's more responsive than it was before the takeover. And we've also added long-form tweets. We've added, you can now post videos after 2 hours and soon videos of any length. We're rolling out our subscriber programs so people can, content creators can actually make a living on Twitter by having some of their content behind a paywall. We open source the algorithm, so there's transparency about what tweets get shown, what content gets shown versus not. I think you say, like, what are you really going to trust? Are you going to trust some sort of black box algorithm from some other site, or are you going to trust the thing that you can actually see and understand?
But do you accept that there are lots of engineers that are looking at the way that Twitter is built and the lack of engineers, because so many have left, and are worried about the health of Twitter?
Well, I mean, there've been many of these people have predicted that Twitter will cease to function. Their predictions have not turned out to be true. Insert Mark Twain, saying, rumors about death are greatly exaggerated.
Let's go back 6 months.
I mean, we're literally on Twitter right now.
Right.
So it must work.
Let's go back 6 months and even further back than that. When you put that initial bid in, you then had a wobble. You kind of said, I actually don't want to buy Twitter anymore.
I mean, it really is quite entertaining. I mean, it's like soap opera, because when I first made the offer, the response was the board adopted a poison pill. So they were like, hell no, you can't buy Twitter. We'd rather die. We'd like chew on cyanide before being bought. That was their initial response.
And then you said, actually, I don't want to buy it.
Yes,
So
and then they said, no, you must buy us. Gun to the head, you have to buy us. I'm like, are you the same people who said you'd rather die than be bored? Doesn't that seem odd?
So I guess my question to you is, in terms of, you said that the reason was because of bots, because Twitter was filled with bots.
Well,
Now, looking back at it now, was there a little bit of you that thought, actually, maybe I've overpaid, actually, maybe I don't want to do this, I want to get out of this? Be honest.
Yeah, no. The problem was that the publicly stated user numbers were in excess of the real user numbers.
I've heard you talk about that.
Yes,
you
yes.
Talk about that.
Yes.
Basically, looking back at it now, was that the only reason that you wanted to pull out?
Yes. That was literally the issue. It's like let's say you buy a warehouse full of goods, and you're told that less than 5% of the goods in the warehouse are broken, you know. But then you actually get the warehouse. You look into the warehouse, and it turns out actually 25% of the things are broken. You'd be like, huh, that's not what you said.
So then you changed your mind again and decided to buy it. Did you do that? Did you do that?
I kind of had to.
Right. Did you do that because you thought that a court would make you do that?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that is the reason.
Right. So you were still trying to get out of it, and then you just were advised by lawyers, look, you're going to have to buy this.
Yes.
Interesting. So you.
Yeah.
So you didn't actually want to purchase it, even when you said you were going.
Well, not at that price.
You were going to, really.
No, I mean, like let's say, I think the analogy is pretty close. Like, let's say, it's like there's a warehouse full of goods. They say the warehouse, less than 5% of what's in the warehouse is broken. And then you walk into the warehouse, you say, actually, it's 25%. So you might still want to buy what's in that warehouse, but probably at a lower price. Not buying the stuff that's broken.
So you didn't have an epiphany. You just thought, I'm gonna have to buy this. I might as well buy the bullet.
Yeah.
So then you walk
It's not super complicated.
Right. I'm not sure you've said that before.
Oh, fair enough.
So then you came into Twitter.
Cue a whole bunch of court cases. You said this in the BBC interview, etc.
So you then came into Twitter with a sync. What were your first impressions?
Well, I thought, wow, this is a really nice office building.
Expensive.
Yes, a very expensive office building. Great decor. It's a lovely place. I mean, and definitely spending money like it's going out of fashion, which it isn't quite going out of fashion yet. So, no, I mean, the gravity of the situation is perhaps not well understood. At the point at which the company, the transaction closed, Twitter was tracking to lose over $3 billion a year. And had $1 billion in the bank. So that's 4 months to death. So this is your starting position. How would you feel? Pretty intense, you know.
You also had to borrow quite a lot of money and pay interest on that too.
Well, that's part of why it was the $3 billion run rate. So, in rough numbers, a normal year, Twitter would do, let's say, $4.5 billion in revenue, $4.5 billion in cost. I mean, it was really kind of like a non-profit. They'd run it at roughly break even. Now,
but that's not bankruptcy. You're not saving that company from bankruptcy. No, it's breaking even.
But then the issue is that if you then add $1.5 billion in debt servicing and have a massive drop in revenue, which we did, which was partly cyclic and partly political concerns and whatever. So revenue, call it dropped by over a third. It's not, and this is not just Twitter. Facebook and Google have also seen some significant advertising revenue declines. It's been a little higher at Twitter, but most of the advertisers are coming back. So I think we'll be back where there's a cyclic demand drop, which is still pretty significant. But in rough numbers, revenue dropped from $4.5 billion to $3 billion, and expenses went from 4.5 to 6, creating a $3 billion negative cash flow situation, and Twitter having $1 billion in the bank. That's 4 months to live. So unless drastic action was taken immediately, this company's going to die and be owned by banks.
Let's talk about that drastic action, because almost immediately you sacked a lot of Twitter workers. And I spoke to them. It was very easy to speak to them when it happened. And the way they said, pretty much everyone said, is that it felt quite haphazard.
It was.
And it felt a little bit uncaring.
I wouldn't say uncaring. The issue is like, the company's either going to go bankrupt, or if we do not cut costs immediately, this is not a caring, uncaring situation. It's like if the whole ship sinks, then nobody's got a job.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just lost their jobs like that. And they weren't. They didn't even know they'd lost their jobs often. They just
okay.
they were just
so let
frozen
me
out
ask
of
you,
their accounts.
what would you do?
Well, you might want to give someone some notice. I mean, you might. By the way, I'm not running Twitter, but
I know, but
this is the criticism, and this is what staff members say. A little bit of notice, you know.
No, I understand. You have 4 months to live. 120 days. In 120 days, you're dead. So what do you want to do?
How much are you worth?
I don't know.
But I mean, we're talking about around the $200 billion mark. I mean, it's not quite. You're framing it in a way that you know that it had a few months to live. You're quite a rich man.
I sold a lot of Tesla stock to close this deal. I did not want to sell the Tesla stock.
Okay. Do you have any regrets on the way that some of the staff were let go?
I mean, people were given, 3 months of severance, some cases more. So, but we're like I said, the companies need to run on their own cognizance, and it's not so easy for me to sell stock as people might think. I have to sell stock during certain periods. I can't sell stock during other periods. So there are only brief windows where I can sell Tesla stock. And then this is often taken as some lack of faith in Tesla. And in fact, the Tesla stock sales caused the Tesla stock to plummet, which is not good.
Do you think those two were connected?
Well, the people couldn't parse the difference between I'm selling Tesla stock because I've lost faith in Tesla, which I haven't, or that it's desperately needed for Twitter.
Okay, and then after that, after you let go of a lot of staff, obviously Twitter became slimmed down a lot, and then you started making some more policy decisions. One of those policy decisions was to bring Donald Trump back. He hasn't actually tweeted yet.
Right.
Do you expect him to come back at any point? Like, have you spoken to him?
I haven't spoken to him. I don't know. He may or may not come back. But the point is that Twitter should be a town square that gives equal voice to the whole country and ideally the whole world. It should not be a partisan politics, and the more of a partisan politics that are on the very far left of the spectrum. San Francisco, Berkeley politics normally is quite niche, but if Twitter effectively acted as a megaphone for very niche regional politics and megaphone that to the world. So, in order for something to serve as a digital town square, it must serve all people from all political persuasions, provided it's legal. Close to half the country voted for Trump. I wasn't one of them. I voted for Biden. But nonetheless, free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
I think the issue some people have is that a lot of people were brought back. I mean, some people were brought back who were previously banned for spreading things like QAnon conspiracies. You have people like Andrew Tate who were brought back, who were previously banned for things like hate speech. Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
You're literally asking me?
Yes.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information? At the point at which you say that there is this is misinformation, like who is going to decide that?
But you accept that misinformation can be dangerous, that it can cause real-world harms, that it can potentially cause...
Yes, so the point I'm trying to make is that the BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false. Do you agree that that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Right.
In its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes. Even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
Right,
and I think in the grand scheme of things, the BBC does aspire to be accurate.
But you accept there has to be a line in terms of hate speech. I mean, you're not looking at total 100% unrestricted speech.
Well, I mean, I generally am of the opinion that if the people of a given country are against a certain type of speech, they should talk to their elected representatives and pass a law to prevent it. So, for example, you cannot advocate murdering someone. That's illegal in the United States, and everywhere, really, I suspect. So there are limits to speech.
I mean, I guess taking your argument to a logical conclusion then, do you accept that there's more misinformation on the platform if it's not being policed in the same way?
I actually think there's less these days because we've eliminated so many of the bots which were pushing scams and spam. And previous management turned a blind eye to the bots because their bonuses were tied to user growth. And if your compensation is tied to user growth, well, you're not going to look too closely at some of the users. That's part of the problem. So I think we've got less misinformation because we don't have the bot problem that we used to do. And we also have given a lot of attention to community notes, which corrects, with community itself, corrects misinformation. It's been very effective.
I mean, I would only just add that, we have spoken to people who have been sacked that used to be in content moderation, and we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
what hate speech are you
address?
talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
but just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
Personally, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying.
Well, I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I
don't. You can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that for you feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
But you said
a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at
hang on a second. You said you've seen
following.
more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And
well, then how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying...
Then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet. And yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well...
That's false.
No, what I claimed...
You just lied.
What I claimed was... there are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not, I mean, right, and
literally
if you look at something
one.
Like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time. COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation.
Has BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, and then it disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, so. You thought it wasn't?
I see now why you've done Twitter Spaces. I am not a representative of the BBC's editorial policy. I want to make that clear. Let's talk about something else. You want to talk about the BBC?
You too.
All right, let's talk about something else.
You weren't expecting that.
Let's talk about something else. Narendra Modi. The BBC did a documentary about Narendra Modi and his leadership during the riots in Gujarat.